My name's Ryan Foote. Thank you guys for coming. This talk is kind of centered around obviously DevOps, but from the mindset of, a lot of times it's really hard for people that are in a certain situation long enough to, first of all, a lot of people consider that a buzzword and they get turned off by buzzwords. Joe, as a matter of fact, when I presented this idea last year, I did this talk at CodeMash the previous year. And when I gave him the abstract, he said, it just really sounds like a CICD talk. And we have a lot of those. And I'm thinking, that's true, but that's only part of the story. So I think that a lot of times people get these like IT buzzwords and they'll kind of just get turned off by the idea. So there's that component of it. And then there's also, from my personal experience, and that's why, since I'm not really a natural speaker, I don't really do social media stuff all that much, and I don't blog. But I do kind of want to get into this space, and I think the one thing that I could come at it from angle-wise would be organically, I have my personal experiences to share. And I come from a company, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself properly. I'm the cloud team architect at Dayton Freight Lines. And what that really means is just I'm the manager of the cloud development team. And what that really means is we just do stuff in Azure and stuff, right? ASP.NET, C#, Azure, that kind of thing. So given that, I work at an LTL freight company, right? So our job isn't necessarily, or our company mission isn't to ship software. So a lot of times the goals of a developer from kind of latest and greatest point of view or process-oriented aren't really in line with the companies, because companies don't care. They just want you to do the things, right? So a lot of times it's like, how much is this really worth? And it can become kind of a conflict there naturally. So from a DevOps standpoint, we didn't have any, right? So we come, from the time when I started, we'd have source control, right? For some of the areas of the company, we'd have source control. And so our DevOps was no ops. It was copy and paste, no automated tests, no anything like that. So when we start talking about DevOps, from a freak out standpoint where this title comes from, it's like, oh God, we can't do that. We have to do our other jobs. We'd have to hire a team of engineers to do this. And that's just not true. So I wanted to kind of give a talk to show you some things, some easy ways to get into it, maybe explain what the culture is all about, because it is a culture. So with that said, we're kind of going to go over why DevOps is good. Why do we care about it? Why is it a buzzword that people throw out there? How do I get into it? How do I begin my journey? Where am I at along my journey? What are the next steps as far as that goes? This is a kind of a holistic approach to the software development lifecycle. You're involving your IT ops, your network, your database engineers, your developers, QA testing, all that kind of stuff into kind of one product-centered team whose singular goal is to ship software. So how do you go from not having that to having that? What are the steps along the way? And then as such, we're going to peek into Azure DevOps, formerly known as Visual Studio Team Services, formerly known as Visual Studio Online, and whatever other names that they've had for it. We're going to use that as kind of our medium for exploring some of the concepts. Does anybody work with Azure DevOps right now? Just you? Great, and I know you. So nobody works with Azure DevOps right now. Cool.
We're looking at it.
Okay.
We're looking at it. We're using on-premise TFS right now.
Okay, well, same idea. So like if you keep your server patched, it's now called DevOps Server, formerly TFS. So it's the same idea. Does anybody use like Atlassian products and stuff? Okay, all right, same concept. And then we're going to get into some of the tooling, Visual Studio Get, Team Workflow. We're going to talk about branching, and all this kind of ties together with some of the concepts that you need to start embracing for DevOps. The Get Flow things up there, we're not really going to talk much about that. I'll kind of give my personal experiences on our team and how we use that. So what's this all about? How many people have said this? Yeah. How many people have heard other people say that, right? This is the biggest BS in the business. This is garbage. If somebody says that to me, I get angry, right? I don't care if it works on your machine, right? What does that do for me? if somebody comes to me and says, hey, that thing you made for me, it doesn't work. And I go, works on my machine. I mean, don't they want to smack me when I say that? So this is all about kind of making this statement obsolete, right? We're here because this is a real thing. This is something that happens. You pull a task and you start working on it, you test it, you get it going, and then you run it and hey, this works great, awesome, let's go give it to the IT people or whatever. They're going to go put it on a machine. They go put it on the machine, and since you're not working, because you're not DevOpsing, right? So you're not working with IT, they don't know what your machine has to, what your application depends on, so they just set you up a machine, you go install it, fire it up, it doesn't work. Oh, it works on my machine, so, oh no. So this is all about kind of killing this with a process so that that's not even an issue. So why is that important? Why is DevOps important? Other than getting rid of the, the Stanley thing there. Is that Stanley from Office? Is that his name? I'm not a big Office person. Anyway. So basically, why is that important? Because like I said, if we're not DevOpsing, we're no-opsing. And if we're no-opsing, we're talking about human beings doing human being type things, right? We blow stuff up, we fail, we screw it up. So, we don't have DevOps, really. We're doing our own thing on our team, but a real life situation of this stuff happening. So we've got, a standard scenario where, people that don't have processes in place will go in there and say, we got a VM configured as a web server, several web apps running on the thing. And then we have a product, right? A CRM system for our salespeople to use. So we'll have this standard thing where it's got IIS application, CRM system, prod, CRM system test, right? So then our big DevOps is we use a publish profile in Visual Studio. We can right-click publish, and that's cool. Well, you have to select the right one, right? So we get a task, we go implement a feature. We want to show it on the dev machine, the test dev machine, during a sprint review or whatever it is. And somebody that, okay, go ahead and publish that. Okay. So they just right-click publish. They didn't know that their default profile was the production one. So that feature that we were supposed to be demoing goes into production. That can't happen, right? You've got a DevOps process in place. It won't happen because you'll have something configured to say, as soon as I ship that or commit that code into place, it's gone and it's where it needs to be. We've had an issue where our director of IT, right, fancies himself a bit of a developer, so have some problems overnight or whatever it is. He gets in there, changes some source code on the machine where it was living. Maybe it was one of those deals where it's like a ASPX.cs code behind file. He changed something, right? So then you go and you do an actual feature, actual bug fix where you're going out of source control. He doesn't put in source control. He's doing it right on the destination. So he gets I get a task and I go and I check that work out and I start working on it. And I right-click publish or file copy the new thing there and check myself into source control. Next thing I know, I broke his thing because he didn't follow a process, right? And that's a director of IT, so that's kind of a big deal. That's a human being doing a very human being type thing. And then you have things like lead time, right? So how long does it take you from a time a feature request or bug item is put on your board to the time you can fix it, the time a customer or a user reports it to the time you can actually have it in production producing value, right? Having a set process and a set culture revolving around shipping software helps reduce that lead time. And obviously, if you spend the effort in setting up this whole idea or this whole process from start to finish, once you get that in place, it's less time you have to think about deploying this thing through whatever archaic means that you were doing in the past, right? So you're using your pipeline to push this stuff out, and you're not going in there and doing all these manual process where you have to think, okay, where does this go? What was the dev site's name? I can't remember. And then also quality. This idea of DevOps comes from the whole idea of producing value as quickly as humanly possible to the end user. Quality is built into that and baked into that. And in an age where agile methodologies are so strong and so prevalent, it just plays nicely with it. So how many people hire? You do interviews? Anybody? If I see one more resume come in that says agile development on it like it's a skill, it just bothers me. But that just shows you how prevalent it is and everywhere. So this is kind of all playing together in this idea of a culture. So since this is a scary buzzword, right? How do I get started with it? If I go to my boss or my development manager and I say, hey, we need to start getting into this whole space, and he rolls his eyes and says, whatever. I want to have a plan to get started, right? So what is the plan? It's obviously to hire a team of DevOps engineers, right? We need engineers to do this, like a team of engineers, right? Anybody get LinkedIn messages for jobs? Did anybody ever get the LinkedIn message where it's like the guy goes, I got the perfect opportunity for you. It's to come to this place to be our chief principal lead DevOps engineer guy. If you get that, just run the other way because they got problems going on there because you don't want to be that person because that's not a job. It isn't a job. DevOps isn't a job. It is a culture. It is a mindset that you as an organization take on, right? It's a collaborative culture centered around taking all those people that are involved in the process, whether it's a tester, a QA person, a developer, all that kind of stuff, IT ops, network, they have to be involved. And the more that you can product organize your teams, the better that'll be because then all those people, all the silos that existed before now are tightening their feedback loop and you're seeing their goals become united and the goals being to ship that product to make sure that those features that add value, ensuring that they get into production and they produce value as smoothly and as quickly as possible. So it's really a positive shift of focus from writing code. Like if you're a developer, you might be one of those people that live in a closet and you're just coding, and your goal is to, like, whatever it is, put out code. If you start to embrace this as a team aspect, a culture aspect, where, like I said, product organized teams, their goal is to ship the software, to produce the value. It's not to write the code anymore. It's not, to provision new VMs if you're an IT person or whatever. So it's more centered around the product and less around what your individual aspect is, which is a good thing. So how do I get started? One thing that I did forget to mention at the beginning is one of the genesis from this talk is our company has gotten a real big thrust into training, and we'll do training, we'll do it at conferences, just kind of get people exposed to other ways of doing things. So we've been going to Visual Studio Live, Dev Intersections, things like that. So we've been going to Visual Studio Live in Vegas for a while, and a lot of times they'll have big heavy hitters in Microsoft space. Anybody ever heard of Donovan Brown? He's a principal DevOps manager at Microsoft, big on social media. He's a good follow if you guys are into that sort of thing. He travels around the country and he gives talks and motivates people to use Azure DevOps and all that kind of stuff. But he did a keynote at VS Live a few years ago, and he's got this whole thing where, you've got some issues, just rub some DevOps on it. And it's a really catchy tagline on it, and I like it. I like what it stands for. But in this talk, those keynotes are primarily trying to sell you something, from the Microsoft people, and I get that. But the enthusiasm they showed and the ease to which he implemented some DevOps-y type things really kind of pumped me up. And so what I decided to do is I was going to go back to my office, whatever project we were working on, I was going to implement his full, CICD pipeline thingy going on with all this automated tests. I'm going to create a DevOps pipeline. I'm going to automate these tests. I'm going to get it deploying to a VM inside our organization, and I'm going to be just jacked about it, right? So I actually did that. I didn't tell my boss because he was kind of like, hey, maybe we should spend more time developing, less time process-wise. And that's fair. That's just our goals weren't in alignment. So I went back and did this. And so, and got it to work, and it was magical, glorious even. So one of the things that he's talked about is like this journey. And so like the journey I kind of borrowed from him, but I'll give him due credit because, this is good stuff and everybody needs to hear this. But these are your kind of steps that you need to take from a DevOps perspective. And you get down here and you're probably a rock star, right? So most people are like, yeah, sure, we're up here, right? Well, don't take that for granted because, like I said, I started at Dayton Freightlines and the .NET teams didn't have source control. Their idea of source control was at the end of the day, they take their solution and copy it to a file share somewhere, which is awful. So, so have source control. You get some sort of agile practice going on there. Start doing CICD, and then start to embrace things like infrastructure and configuration as code. And then you can start monitoring, using something like application insights to monitor your process and start monitoring your application to make changes. So that's what that's all about. So we're going to follow that right now.
You make it sound like it's so easy just to implement.
No, I know.
So where I work, we just recently we're going to start unit testing.
Sure.
It's like, okay, I know how to do unit tests. Well, hitting a part of the code to unit test doesn't work because we have such,
Or the code
it's
isn't
all
supported.
spaghetti code.
Right.
And every method you try to test has to hit the database for
Right.
some reason.
Absolutely. We had the exact same issue. It's still in some parts of our areas and certain development teams, because as developers organized in teams, we organize our own processes. So some of our teams are very much like that. They are still not in the habit of writing testable code, but bear with me here. I agree with you. I mean, if you say let's start doing unit testing, we didn't know how to do unit testing.
But the company's like, hey, this is the way we're going to do it. All teams now have to start unit testing. Okay, we're good to go.
Right.
And everybody's like freaking out because it's like a lot of the code isn't testable.
Right, it's not testable. So then you have to start refactoring. That's when you go back to those people and you say, it can't be done. You cannot unit test a thing. If it goes to a database, it's not a unit test. So, no, I feel your pain. I apologize if it feels like I'm glossing over this stuff. I do only have like 60 minutes or so to deliver this, so I know I'm kind of glossing over this. But we can talk offline. I can help you because I made that journey. We are still making that journey, which is one of the reasons I like to talk about this stuff. But anyway, from a source control standpoint, if you don't use it, start using it. And it doesn't matter the whole Git versus TFS, TFEC type thing, decentralized, centralized. It doesn't matter. Just make sure it's on a separate machine. You're checking in your code, you're checking out your code, that type of thing. The one key thing here is the branching strategy. You want to have an effective branching strategy, and that's where the whole Git flow thing comes into play for us. So we used TFEC, TFS for a very long time. I didn't even know how to use Git. Kids come out of college now, and they're like, oh yeah, I know Git. I didn't know Git. I had no idea how to do it. But we watch a 2-hour Pluralsight, and all of a sudden it starts to make a little bit of sense. Then you start to use it, and you're like, oh wow, this is way easier than what we were doing in TFS. TFS can do everything that we want to do. It's just harder from a branching standpoint. So basically what we do is we have a main line, and then we branch that into a develop, and then we do topic branches off the develop, and we PR them back into develop. And then once we're ready to release something, we'll PR it back into the master branch, the main line. So, and it just has to be reachable from a separate continuous integration server. So this is the biggest one for me. And this is something that I've become quite passionate about. How many people say they work in an agile organization? No? Yeah, everybody says that. Everybody says that. So Dayton Freight a few years ago, we were all on isolated things. One person would do an entire process, and again, no testing. No, I mean, even from sometimes it was from hey, use it and test it type thing. That didn't happen sometimes. So we decided we need to start cross-pollinating everything. We needed team development. And so somebody says, let's do Agile, let's do Scrum. That'd be great. We bring in a trainer from the West Coast. They come in for 3 days, and they do their Scrum training. And it was cool. However, maybe you guys have a similar situation. Instead of day 3, which was Scrum Master certification type focus, we decided that we were going to say, let's take day 3, and we'll customize it and say, how can we customize Scrum for Dayton Freight? That right there, that sentence in and of itself should set off alarm bells in your head to say, no, you don't customize a framework, you customize yourself to the framework. You follow the framework. Anything that you're not doing that's in the framework, start doing it. Anything that you are doing that isn't in the framework, maybe think about if you should still be doing it, right? So really, we've started to become, some of us, sort of like these Scrum Manifesto, like bullies around the office to say, no, that's not cool, that's not how you do that. And honestly, it produces a lot of friction. But the trainer had a term, and he called it Scrum Butt. So it's like you say, I do Scrum, but we do some other things that are not quite like that, right? So that's bad. You should be utilizing your team's retrospectives and taking them seriously, and really, really focusing on putting stuff on your board from the retrospectives that forces your team to make changes. And then after that next 2 weeks or however long it is, you evaluate, did those changes work? And then what else can we do? That type of thing. Our development team, our small team, really took this to heart and started leveraging our retrospectives. And we even got to the point where we decided, guess what? Scrum isn't even for us. You know, Agile means Agile. Scrum means Scrum. Agile, Scrum is Agile. There are other frameworks that you can follow. So we identified some things that were problems in our processes, one of which being we were dragging work from sprint to sprint, which was no good. And we were having problems with work in progress, too many work in progress items. So what we did was said, it sounds like Kanban might be good for us. So we started doing Kanban, and we even made rules in our Azure DevOps dashboard that said, hey, we've got 4 devs pulling tasks. If we have more than 4 work in progress, maybe we should put alerts up and turn things red that weren't red before, just so we get that visual cue that says something's wrong. You can even go in there and customize the amount of work items that you're allowed to drag on the board. Aaron did that to me a few months ago. He took the item from like 4 down to 3, and I tried to drag an item onto the board. I couldn't do it because there was a rule in place where we couldn't do that. So again, that stuff comes out of retrospective, so you got to start taking that seriously. And the second one, obviously, are tenets of like Scrum. When you get done with an iteration, are you producing incremental shippable code? That's where the whole CICD thing comes into play, because when you build, the last thing you do is publish. You don't have to do anything with it after you publish it. The idea is you could if you wanted to. So that needs to be a focus. And that kind of all plays in with your sprint planning and figuring out how much can I do and what is an actual shippable unit. But you need to work on that. Are you using work items to track tasks, bug items, bugs, etc., backlog items and bugs, etc.? That one's pretty easy. Obviously, if you start using a tool like Azure DevOps, it just is there, and so you use it. Use the appropriate process template, whether it's Agile or Scrum or whatever it is. And is the backlog visible, right? Are you putting your stuff up there for your stakeholders and your users to see? If that's the case in your apps, you're producing increments and iterations, you can start efforting things and seeing how hard things are and slotting things goal-wise. Hey, by this date we should have these things done, and then you can start working on testing and quality and DoD, and all this stuff kind of plays together and plays nicely in that we talk about DoD, which is a definition of done, right? So what does it take to be done? What if and this is obviously embracing the DevOps culture. What if one of my definition of done criteria was all tests are passing, right? So then you can enforce that at a definition of done level, and then if you have a CI pipeline built that says, let's run the unit test with my application, if that breaks, that task can't be done now. So that person can't move on with the rest of their day because they just broke the test in the build. Or maybe like the build has to pass, or like your definition done says it has to be in the QA environment producing value for us to be for the task to be done. And some of the criteria for being in the QA environment are obviously it has to pass a build, it has to pass all the tests, and it has to get deployed to that QA environment. Again, all this stuff plays together. And next step being continuous integration. So continuous integration is basically when you commit your code to your repository and something builds and then integrates the code in with the rest of the code, right? So basically, after each check-in, we want to run our continuous integration process, which is build the application, run the test, package for deployment, and just really focus on getting that first successful build. Make some sample applications. If you're going to start a new project soon, get into Visual Studio, get into Azure DevOps, and start making sample applications and making build pipelines. Configure the separate task. Figure out which settings that you'll need. And you can do that in the cloud or on premises. Obviously, there's build and release built into the on-premises TFS product. So really just want to focus on getting that first build, because as soon as that first developer commits code and they see that build run and their code gets integrated with the rest of the code, first developer does that is going to be jacked about it. They're going to be really excited if they haven't done it before. And that's what I told you when I came home from the Visual Studio Live. That's what I did, right? And so these Visual Studio agents are slow, the build agents. And so we had a developer that was kind of a cowboy coder. And I didn't tell anybody I did this. So he goes to commit, we're using TFVC. And he goes to commit or to check in his change set, and it gives him a dialog box and says, "Oh, slow down there. You gotta wait for this build to complete before you can go." And it didn't. It didn't complete. It broke on him. So then, he successfully over a few turns. He's one of these guys that commits like every 2 seconds to the actual main thing. And so like he was getting pissed that this build's taking 20 minutes and I can't get my code through. And I'm like, well, maybe you're going too fast. Maybe you shouldn't do that. So we started to slowly change his behavior just because we had some guardrails in place, right? And all of a sudden he wasn't breaking the build every time he checked a change set in. So that's kind of a big deal. That helps team process and team morale. And continuous delivery is the same idea, but from the delivering aspect. So basically you're talking about continuous integration, producing a build artifact, continuous delivery, taking that build artifact and doing something with it. Like, let's get one environment stood up from our continuous integration process, right? So what we did in our environment was we decided to, because we have the develop in the mainline branch, we decided to tie sort of the development branch to the QA environment. So our continuous integration process for the development branch ends up in that build artifact being deployed to our QA environment. So we tie all this together with our definition of done in that when we commit code and pull that into the development branch, a continuous integration process runs, and it builds it, and it runs our test, and then part of the definition of done says, okay, is it in the QA environment, and is it functioning as the user desires, right? So if it gets in the QA environment and the UAT comes back and the QA people say, nope, that's not exactly what we wanted, I can't go back and done my item. I have to go back and modify the code. I have to work with that branch and figure out what I did wrong. So that's just kind of baked into our process. And at that point, you can start focusing on this point right here, automated integration and functional and load tests. So if you get that other environment set up, that's not your production environment, you can start doing things like running functional tests. So we have an example here that I'll show you where it'll push the code into the particular environment, and then it'll run its, anybody use Selenium WebDriver stuff? It'll run those tests after it's been deployed. So, obviously you want to do that in the production environment too, just to be sure. But if you're doing that at all steps of the process, each environment it goes to, it makes sure that that behavior is the same that it should be every time. And then obviously load tests are beneficial as well. So, and then you can start bringing humans in. Well, before, if you wanted to review or have somebody unit or QA or work with your stuff, you take your laptop to them, I guess. I don't know. So it's not in production. I mean, how else would you do that? I don't know. Have a meeting where you project and you're using it off your laptop. Maybe they could like that. But if you have a QA environment, you can kind of have your process. I commit my code. I do my pull request. I move on about my day. I know in 45 minutes that'll be in the QA environment. I can take a break. I can go get some coffee. I can read an article or whatever. And then I know that that person's going to get a Slack message that says, hey, this is in the QA environment, and assign them the QA task, and they're going to be off doing their thing. It's a super, super tight feedback loop at that point, which is a good thing. So, what's the moral of the story there? You do not let your friends right-click publish. That's from Damian Brody. He's on the Donovan Brown's team. He's a funny guy. So what's next? What's beyond this? So to me, logically, up until now, where you got source control, agile, CICD, that's pretty normal stuff. A lot of people can get to that point and where they're saying, I'm DevOpsing like hell. This is great. I love this. This is where it starts to get interesting to me, right? So this is where you might start bringing in your Docker stuff, or like Kubernetes, or like from the Azure resource standpoint, ARM templates. Have you guys heard of ARM templates? Okay. ARM templates are Azure Resource Manager templates, where you can define in a JSON file the Azure resources that you want to use or that you need and configure them. So ARM templates are kind of like combining infrastructure and configuration as code into like one thing. And then you can run that through your CI/CD. And the really cool part of it is that you can have a build task that verifies that document, and then it copies it to the artifact staging directory, so it's available when the artifact is released in the release definition. And then you can run a task that says, take this ARM template, deploy my resources, and you can ensure that you can parameterize the whole thing to make sure that the geographic region is where you want it to be and all that kind of stuff. You could deploy to 2 geographic regions at the same time using this file. So at that point, that's pretty tight integration, pretty tight, I guess, pretty good synergy with your whole flow of your application at that point, because now it lives in your source control. It doesn't depend on, like let's say that I hire a new developer and I'm trying to teach them about the process, and I'm showing them, they're like, oh wait, I forgot I got to go out to Azure and create these resources first. No, I just push a button and set up a new environment, right? So I copy a build and release definition and say, okay, this is East US, this is West US. I'll just click a button and have it fire and go, and all of a sudden, 20 minutes later, I have a new set of Azure resources ready to use. So pretty cool stuff. In monitoring, I guess since I'm Azure focused, one of the things I would bring up would be application insights. And application insights are a way to sort of get some telemetry data on your applications. They already by default sort of report via an instrumentation key from your app to the cloud, all the things about your application, but you can also use it as a logger too. So there's an SDK that you can use inside your .NET apps that can use that to do some custom telemetry information, stuff that you think of on your own, which is pretty cool. So obviously, monitoring isn't just on your application, it's on your lead time, cycle time, your team. How long does it take your team to do the things that they do to produce value, and then start to work to review or to reduce those. And that plays with the agile and the retrospectives and things like that as well. So, all right. So what is this all about? And I've said it a few times. This is all about delivering as much value in the shortest amount of time possible to the customer, right? That's all that really matters. And if you get your mindset in that frame of mind, you're going to be better off for it. So, so this is a really lame blog post that I made in preparation for Code Match, so I didn't have to have a whole list of references and stuff. I could just point people to the blog post and they could read it. I don't know how relevant it is in 2019, so whatever. You can hit me on Twitter as well. So any questions right now? Because what I'm going to do is go into Azure and show you what's called a DevOps project, which is a really cool thing. And I'm going to try to blaze through it because I like to be done in about 29 minutes or so. So we'll see. But any questions on this stuff so far?
At the very beginning, what really got you guys started down this path? Is it cultural? Is it?
Well, it was just because we're talking. I've been at Dayton Freight for going on 15 years. And this whole process, this whole movement just started about, 3-4 years ago, right? So it was just years of being like, oh my God, I am so sick of this. I'm so sick of the screw-ups. I'm so sick of the manual process because I'm super thorough. Some people are not. I produce less mistakes, but it costs me more. Mental energy, time, just the sheer time of ensuring and double-checking and whatever that I'm doing. It's sure nice to have a process defined to do all this stuff. So it's kind of out of necessity for my own insanity, or my own sanity, so to speak. I'm protecting my insanity. So,
how much time have you saved on commit collisions? Going with Git flow versus commit to master.
That's tough because we never, before we did the team stuff, it was really just like silos. And really when we started doing team stuff, it was TFVC. And yeah, you would run into issues like that because, we didn't have like a whole series of branches with TFVC. It was really just a development branch. And then you have people kind of colliding on that all the time. The Git flow, the project we're working on right now is actually the first time we actually used Git. So we use Git and Git flow at the same time, and it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. So the verdict is still out, though, how effective we'll be when we start to grow to like.
So it was your first source control, so you didn't use SVN or anything like that before?
No, this is the first project that we did using Git before we used TFVC for, I'd say, I started in 2004, we didn't have source control. I brought in SourceSafe. Anybody remember Visual SourceSafe? Yeah, I know. And so the other guy hated it that I was working with at the time, so he wanted to use TFS. So then we started using that, but we weren't using it right. It was the same. The things we were doing with TFS were exactly the same as source control. As SourceSafe. So it wasn't until we started this whole movement where we started to say, okay, let's start getting the best tools in here and using the things in the way that they're meant to be used. So.
Are these slides available online?
They are. I think they're available for that, and it should be a OneNote link. So the updated slides should be up there. I think. If not, you can hit me up, and I actually give you my card, and you can email me, and I'll get them to you. But I think they are at that link. So, any other questions? Yes.
Is your stuff all web apps? Because one of the things we struggle with is we've got some desktop applications that we have to create an installer.
Oh yeah.
We've got some other stuff that's click once, and that's been, or we're using like Visual Studio Release Management now.
Mm-hmm.
But getting that stuff to work in release management has been a major pain point.
Yeah, I could see that. And yes, ours are web apps. One of the other teams is using UWP, Windows apps, and I think there's an enterprise level store that they can deploy to straight from DevOps server or whatever it is, so that would take that pain out of it. You're speaking about stuff that we should have been doing 15 years ago that I had no idea how to do, which is one of the reasons I got into it. Just so happened to be that by that time I'm on web apps, so I don't have to worry about it. So I'm sorry. So I might not be great help there, but I know if you're using UWP or something like that, which don't do that, they're probably going to get rid of that, I would assume. So I'm not much help there, I'm sorry.
UWP is pretty good.
It is new, but from my standpoint, with the cross-platform Net Standard and .NET Core, I believe they're going to get rid of that and have people just use Xamarin. So with Xamarin Forms growing the way it is, I would say they probably just end up using Xamarin. So anyway, anything else? I'll try to breeze through this real quick. I want you guys just to know that this is a thing that you can do. It's not really like an enterprise solution, but it's a really, really cool thing. And you can use it if you like try to think about, I wonder how you would do this. Well, like for example, the automated UI tests. I wonder how you do that. Roll one of these DevOps projects and it'll show you how they did it at the very least. So what you do, oh nice. If you don't have access to the Azure Portal, Microsoft gives you a way. If you guys have MSDN subscriptions or Visual Studio subscriptions, you should get some credits there that you can spend. That's what I'm using right now. They also have a free account that you get like 200 credits, and you can use them. You have a year to use them, I guess. So there's that way too. But anyway, portal.azure.com. Can you guys see that? Kind of okay. Let me bump it up a little bit. And maybe that helps. I don't want to get too crazy here because I don't have a mouse. I'll end up scrolling all over the place. So what you want to do is come in here to create a resource. It's called a DevOps Project, aptly name. And I'm going to try to breeze through here and not talk too many about the options. I have a problem when I'm practicing talks, and so I like to explain every option, even though it's not really relevant to what I'm talking about, so I'll try not to do that. Obviously, there's a lot of different platforms that they support, and you can even bring your own code. Never tried that, probably should. I like .NET Core, so I'm going to go and use that. I'm not going to add a database because I don't need to. And here's where you have your deployment options. Obviously, your Docker-related things there with your containers and images and things. I'm going to use a Windows web app, really because it's free. It's the easiest for the demonstration purposes, and it's free. The Linux web app could technically work for the .NET Core one. They don't have a free plan for Linux ones. I don't know why, so we'll use a Windows one. And here's where you start to configure, because what's going to happen here is going to build you some Azure stuff. It's going to build you some Azure DevOps stuff. And from the Azure DevOps side, it's saying, do you have an existing DevOps organization, which is a nice way to say a team project collection in old TFS land, and the project name. So in this case, I already have a collection. I don't want to have them create a new one, so I'm just going to call it Dayton.net. And it's using my Visual Studio subscription, and I want to put this in the East, because that seems to have the most things. And additional settings, this is a key one. If you do this, make sure you do this. Or if you create a DevOps project, make sure you do this, because you want to change this guy down there to free. Make sure they're not charging you any money. Okay, so once I set all my options up and hit done, boom, it starts to go, make the magic. What's happening right now is it's going out to, it's doing two sets of things. Like I said, it's going out to Azure DevOps, and it's creating you a new project in your project collection, or your organization, as they call it. It's going to set up your Git repo. It's going to set up your work items board. It's going to set up your pipelines, meaning your build and your release, and some other things. And so the repo is going to have an initial commit made to it using one of those ASP.NET templates. That you say file new website or whatever, and it'll just be some like lame template or whatever. And I'll show you, it's also creating some test projects and things like that. Then it's going to create a build that has continuous integration turned on. And that build is going to build the ASP.NET application. It's going to run its tests, and it's going to do some things logistically with the non-buildable things like the ARM template, and move those into the build artifact staging directory. So because it's doing an initial commit, right, it triggers continuous integration. And because it has a release that does a deployment also tied to the build, the deployment is going to happen inside the release. So as soon as that build's done, it's going to trigger the release, and that release hasn't run at this point. But that release is going to deploy not only your application, it's going to deploy your resources. So when you come in here, this is resource groups. A resource group in Azure is just a logical container for your Azure resources so that you can move them around easy. One of the purposes is using ARM templates. It's very super easy to kind of stand one up and tear one down. You'll notice that it's created a resource group and nothing's in it. It used to be about a year or so ago when you created these, you'd already see your Azure web app in there. But they've switched to these ARM templates, and the ARM templates are in source control. Source control is running the CICD. CICD isn't done yet, so there are no resources to show you. So that's just something I'd like to point out. But at this point, we should see the Dayton Net project show up inside my Azure DevOps. And we can go through and look at all the different things here. And we'll notice that the build is actively running. And so one of the things I like to do is kind of investigate what's going on with the build. These things are pretty slow. I will take this opportunity to bring this up. The Azure DevOps, not the on-prem version of it, but the Azure DevOps defaults to the what they call hosted agents. And the agent is just a program that you set up as a service on a machine. They have various flavors of them. They have like a Windows one, they have a Ubuntu, I can't ever say that right, Linux one, and then they have various flavors from Mac and all this kind of stuff. So this one's using a Windows VM as a build agent. They're super slow. And if you're coming from the free angle on this, they limit you to 240 minutes per month. You know, it seems like a lot, but if you start doing anything of substance, you will burn through that. So they do sell you, and I'm just in full transparency, they do offer what they call pipelines that you can buy that take that time limit away, so it's unlimited. And it's one pipeline per build. So if you want 5 concurrent, the capability to do 5 concurrent builds, you need 5 pipelines. I don't remember the cost. You can go out to the marketplace and check that out, but the same thing works if you do a on-premises agent, which they allow you to do in the cloud version. So what you can do is come into here and download the agent and set it up on one of your own machines, and then that machine will register as a capable agent in a separate pool inside Azure DevOps, and that way you can configure a build to use an on-prem agent. And that's what one of our other development teams do. They use the cloud services and they put their source in the cloud, but they're using an on-prem agent because they just can't deal with, well, for one thing, they have to deploy to an in-house server, so that just makes a better option that way, because that machine actually has access to it. That's one of the questions you guys asked about being behind the firewall. If you didn't care that your source was out of the firewall, you could use an on-prem agent with the cloud service. That way the on-prem agent has, obviously, network access to that resource that's on-prem. And then one of the benefits of doing that is these things are super slow. So you could have a really beefed up agent and it could crank through one of these builds pretty quick. However, then you have to keep it updated. The .NET Core SDK updates quite frequently. So you want to leverage that in your code, you'd have to not only upgrade your project and your machine to use new .NET Core, you'd also have to go back to your build machine and make sure that that's up to date. All right, so it's already done. The release has probably kicked off by now, and that'll be going through its paces.
So you chose the free path on this. If you were going with a production premium path, would it be faster?
It would not be faster. That's why I'm not sure. I think it's intentional, probably, but no, it's not faster. It'd just be like you'd have to buy a pipeline, at least one pipeline. And do you remember what the pipelines cost, Aaron?
I think hosted is $50 a month. Self-hosted is like 10.
Yeah, something like that. So the self-hosted would be like, I'm going to use an on-prem agent, but I still need a pipeline for it. And then
is that metered also? Is that metered?
No, as soon as you buy a pipeline, the time limit is gone. So that's what.
But the speed is not.
The speed is not any better. There are things that you can do, and Aaron could probably speak to that. He's gotten to be an expert of this kind of stuff. So they have this technology called container instances, which allows you to use you can basically use a combination of Azure Function and a container instance to spin up your own build agent that you configure, and then you can add caching. One of the slowest things in our build is NPM, downloading that. So we can cache NPM packages, start caching NuGet packages, and start speeding the build up. But you're not going to see just drastic increases. If the duration becomes a big problem, you're probably going to have to go on-prem agent at that point and just beef up a server or something. So, oh, cool. So now, if you see that this task right here is for, deploying the Azure resource group. So when I come back in here, I should see resources now fired up. So you can see that ARM template actually did what it's supposed to do. Okay, so other than the build and release, and what I want to do is put a change through its paces. I want to make a change, and I want to show you guys that the change went through the process, and then provision a new resource. And yeah.
So you're waiting for that process to complete. If that took 3 minutes, that's 3 minutes. You did 2:43 or whatever.
Yeah. Unfortunately. So one of the things, key things that I want to, if you were doing a real world project, you should probably be aware of, and this kind of relates to the whole Git flow thing. So with this repo, you get a master branch. That's it, right? So you wouldn't want somebody, and maybe you guys do, I wouldn't recommend it if you're doing a real world project, but you don't want people committing directly to that master branch, right? So what we recommend doing is obviously feature branching that and then pull requesting into that master branch. And in our scenario, what we do is we go one step further and we use the develop branch. We topic branch the develop branch and then PR those back in. And then once we're ready, basically our workflow is we have product backlog items and then tasks. Every time we complete a task, we squash our changes locally. We push it to the remote if it's not there already. And then we PR that into the develop. And then the develop will squash the changes coming in case somebody forgot to squash their changes locally. And so you have a pretty clean history coming in to develop. And then that'll queue our CI process for develop, which ends up in the QA environment after running the release. Once a product backlog item and all its tasks are complete, we'll have a task to go out there and merge that into master. And so then at that point, you've got a clean develop that's past CI with tests and all that, and we'll actually branch that into a release branch, and then we'll bring the release branch into the master, which queues CI on master, which ends up in our staging environment. So then when we go to do our sprint reviews, all the PBIs that we've completed, we'll just go into the staging environment, and we'll be able to demo off the staging because that's where all our changes are. And as soon as they give a go-ahead, we'll go back to our desk and fire off a manual release that just goes to our production environment, and that'll be that release. So that's how we do it. But in this scenario, what I would want to do is force people to PR into the master branch. And the way you do that in I keep calling it VSTS, and the Azure DevOps is through what's called branch policies. So inside of the branch list, you can go in there and set the branch policies. So as soon as you start setting these options, that's when it enforces the PR. So I'm going to come in here and set a few options. I am a team of one right now, so I want to be able to approve my own changes. And they have this concept of comments on a PR. Have anybody used the GitHub PR tool? Anybody? Okay, so it's similar to that where you can leave comments and then people can reply to those comments. There's a policy in here that says all comments must be resolved before a PR can be completed. And then there's one in there that says the reviewer casts a vote. So there's 3 reviewers. One says accept, one says reject, and the other one hasn't done anything yet. And somebody pushes a change to that branch, it'll reset the votes. So obviously all the votes have to pass in order to go. So that's one of those policies up here. I don't know, probably, because that's the same idea. I've never used it, but I mean, it's the same idea. Yeah, okay. So, and that's what I hear. So the last bit there that is a merge strategy. I think I'm really bad at explaining this most of the time, but what we do on our development branch, since we're topic branching the develop one and then pulling in those, we don't care about the commits from the topic branches because somebody could have committed 27 times. I don't want to see that, and I can't depend on them to squash. We do a squash merge, which kills all those and just brings in as one commit. When we go into master, it's a different story. We do the no fast forward merge, and so that's. If you're doing a public facing one, I think that's the general rule is to use a no fast forward. So don't want to get to it's not a session on Git, so I won't worry about that. But I'm going to do a no fast forward. Code reviews on PRs, exactly. And the one other option I want to show, I won't do this right now, but you can create a build tailored for PR, and you can make sure that build passes. That's just another criteria of the PR passing, of being able to be approved. Normally you would tear down the build down to maybe like a restore, a build and a test. Don't do all the other stuff, and it should be a little bit faster than your continuous integration build. But yeah, you can make it required and then expired after a certain amount of time, which is pretty cool. We actually use that as well. And then I can automatically add a person on a PR so that I don't have to do that every single time. So once I do all that, now I have to PR. So Actually, now that we're probably done with CI, we'll go over ahead here and check out the thing that deployed, just to make sure that it runs. Oh, look, it's magic.
Okay, Frank, you have a policy of you and another need to approve?
We haven't formalized that across teams. Our policy on our team is one of us has to approve, and we don't care. We try to make it so not everybody's doing the same code review, and I have experienced people on my team. I don't need to watch over them. But yeah, as soon as I start dealing with more... No, I'm the only one. No, so Aaron and I, since we're the senior level people, we're the only ones that can approve our own. The other guys have to have theirs approved. So, yeah. Yeah, there's some settings in there that you can have the different roles override branch policies. That can be a problem for people that are prone to mistakes. So I would be careful with that.
I approve myself and somebody else is also approved before it will go.
Right. They have similar things with the permissions. So I'm going to come in here and clone this thing real quick and show what it looks like.
Is that terminal on the cloud or terminal local?
That's local. That's just my Git bash window.
Google Cloud Platform has terminal access there.
Azure has a CLI that you can use in the cloud, yeah. Yeah, that's key for things like automation and sometimes for just like spinning up things quickly. So as you can see, this thing scaffolded me a new solution that has 3 projects. One is unit tests, one is functional tests, and one is the main application. The reason it does that is because it wants to show you running unit tests in the build, and it wants to show you running the functional tests in the release, post deployment. So I don't have the Chrome driver set up, so if I run the functional test from my machine, it will fail because I don't have that stuff set up. So whoever would write those, in a real life scenario, they would actually have to run them locally because you wouldn't want to wait until it got through CICD to actually run your tests. So test passed, and there's nothing real exciting. I won't run the app right now, but what I am going to do real quick is I'm going to make a change just so we can verify that the stuff we're doing is actually making it through the process. And a really lame hello world scenario. Oh, you know what? Can anybody point out what I've done wrong? Nope. I'm working on master. So, real quick, and I'll backtrack a little bit. So what I want to do here is I want to create a work item because I know in my head, since I turned on that policy, I'm going to need a work item to tie my changes to. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a work item so that I have it in place. I can go back retroactively and add one from the PR, but I'll just do that right now. Right. And they use this agile process template, and it's different from they have a Scrum specific one. I don't know if you can change that for the DevOps project or not. I do know that I think this one's weird. So
you're essentially just creating an issue and assigning it to somebody.
Yeah, this would be like, so basically that there's a policy in the branch policies that said each commit needs each pull request needs a work item, and so that would be like saying explicitly you can't commit to this unless you have a reason. So yeah, like in this case, I'm assigning myself a task so that I'm showing that I have a reason, because that commit will be forever linked to that work item, which is pretty cool.
All work should be going to
Yes. So right now I'm branching my master branch into a topic branch, and now I can start making my changes. So and I don't really have time to show the impact of what I would do kicking this through the process, but I know they have a unit test that covers the actual view data. So I will actually go ahead and run that to show you. But what would happen is if I kick this through with a PR, it'll fail on the build test, and then I'll have to do it all over again. So I don't want to go through that process, but take my word for it. It'll fail because this thing is expecting null in the message. So I'm just going to change that real quick. My unit test. And so that's kind of mirrors what it would be like in real life, because I'm such a good developer, I'd make sure I run my test locally before I push everything through and have it fail in CI. So there, I made my change, and now the fun part, I'm going to show you guys the ARM template quickly. And keep in mind, the ARM template is a super painful thing to look at, particularly if you have a large resource group in Azure. But they do have a tool. Well, they have a way, like, okay, let me backtrack. If you don't use an ARM template and you're using Azure right now, and you've manually created all your resources, they have a nice thing that you can do in the portals. You can go in and view the deployment script, and they will generate an ARM template for you. And then you can bring that into your source control, and then maybe start doing Control F for the thing that you specifically want, and try to put blinders on to all the other nonsense in there. Because, like I said, it is super, super hard to look at. That's why I always kind of shrink it down into these areas. So basically, it boils down to maybe 4 different areas of the file that make sense, or that are applicable. The top is kind of like, what schema am I using? You know, because that'll, when it parses it uses the schema, whatever one that you have defined to parse that specific version. And then you have parameters. The parameters are super powerful because, like I said, you could want some sort of geographic redundancy. You know, this is just a lame example where one release, or you have a release in one environment, and the release goes to East US using the same build artifact, and the other one goes to West US. And if you're parameterizing your ARM template, having those values set in the build task, and I can show you real quick since we're talking about it, inside the release task, you can set these variables. So like you can envision here this environment. So right here, and I won't show you, you guys can get in and click around the option as well. I can also help via email or whatever if you want. But what you have here is an artifact, and you have one or more artifacts. There are use cases for that. I don't have them right now, but there are. But you basically are getting an artifact from a build. So when you go into here, you're selecting a build from your DevOps project, and you're saying to the release is saying, whenever I have an artifact, this release is dealing with this build artifact. And then I can start attaching stages for that build artifact. So I could have a stage that goes to, like I said, East US, and each stage has this set of tasks. And inside the resource group deployment task, I can come in here and say East US, right? And so that's in there defined. And I can go in and create another stage in that same release with that same build artifact and say West US. And since that's parameterized, it goes and runs, and it'll just stand up both resource groups whenever those tasks are completed, which is, I think, pretty cool. So I'm glad I have that in there, because I'm going to need to add another one here. Because what I'm going to do just to illustrate this, which is, like I said, extremely lame example, I apologize, but I think it should drive home a point of what you can do. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new web app. So as you can see, it has a resource in here for a website, a resource in here for a server farm, which I don't really care about, and then a resource in here, because this is a true DevOps project, it's giving you application insights that is tuned, that this website is tuned for, right? So that it's got the instrumentation key right here that tells, and you'll notice that this is kind of PowerShell-y. There's some functions you can call, you have parameters and variables and things like that. So it's using the instrumentation key of the application insights instance. So those two are sort of married together because that will be monitoring that particular website. So I'm going to make a new app insights resource and a new website resource, and I'm going to tell the web app about its application insights. It's going to use the same build artifact, so you're going to get a really lame duplicated site and duplicate application in 2 different sites, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, so that should be good. I'm going to add a new variable because I just did that. 2. And since I added a parameter there, I'm going to have to come in here and add it here so I can set it. There. Right. And I'm also going to have to clone this build task because I'm going to be doing this twice. Specifying my app service, which the app service name is that this name is going to be the name that's in that variable I just set. It's using the same build artifact right here, and all else will remain the same. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, awesome. All right, so I should be good to go at that point from the Azure DevOps point of view.
So you're continuing getting prompted for comments?
Yes.
And you're dismissing those?
Yes. I probably shouldn't do that, but since I'm so used to like doing this in a test environment, I haven't been doing that. But you're
in
right.
production, the expectation would be justification for these changes.
Absolutely. Yes.
And is that going to a particular ticket or to?
Not to my knowledge right now. It shows up in a history log somewhere. So if you want to know, man, who changed this build? This isn't right. This is not right. And you go in and say, hey, what did you do?
So even if they don't say, put any comments in there, you just have a timestamp of who did what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so that should be good. And to double check, what I can do is they give you this nice little tool, and this is something that you can add as a build step during the CI build. They have this nice little commandlet that you can run that's called deployment space validate, and it'll validate the template that you just created. So you could add a build task into your CI before, because what happens in the CI is it copies the file, since the ARM template isn't an actual buildable, deployable thing, it's just a file. So there's a build step in there that copies it to the staging directory so that the release can have it to do its thing with it. And it's asking you for values for your parameters that you specified. And it should come back and say, it spits out a big blob of information if you're good. If it didn't go good, it gives you a message that says that you didn't do good. All right, so at this point, saying hello world and new web app. And sometimes I kind of flip back and forth between using the plugin in Visual Studio. I like the sync option for some reason. It's just super quick and easy to do that. Because if you do the command, you actually have to set the upstream and all that, and this just does it for you. So that should be on the remote, and a nice little cool thing that Azure does, or DevOps does, whenever you're in the repos section and you update a branch, it'll be like, hey, you did this thing. Would you like to do a pull request? Yes, I would. So then you get this nice screen here where you get to write up all the wonderful things that you did. You don't see me as a reviewer, but I promise you I'm on there. It'll show up when you look at the pull request. And I am linking my work item at this point, and you can link more than one. And keep in mind, if you're working a task and you add the PBI, there is an option when you complete the pull request on the other side of this, the actual approval view of it, that says complete work items. So you could accidentally complete your PBI if you do that, if you add your PBI at this point. So, and then you get a nice view of the diffs and things like that, and verify that you are committing exactly what you intended to commit, which is important.
You got the option in there to clean up the feature branch.
Yes, when you complete it. Yep. And so at this point, if you had a build going, that build would be queued, and you would see it down here in the list of kind of requirements that are must be true in order for this build to this PR to be approved. I don't have one, so that I don't want to wait on it. So at this point, you can start adding comments, and people can respond to the comments. You can resolve them, leave them open, that sort of thing, and it all abides by the policy of the destination branch. So that's pretty cool. We should see this build queue up, which we do, and then that obviously that'll trigger subsequently the release. But while that's going, I did want to take the opportunity to show you real quick what I was talking about as far as if you have existing resources and you don't have this document, this ARM template, you can have Azure generate one for you. So I always kind of look at things from a resource group level. So when I get a resource group, I pick the one that it created for me, and here are all the resources in there. Because the ARM template is meant to reproduce or be able to stand up a new resource group, it's at that level. So at the properties of the resource group level, you've got an automation script. And I don't know about this little tool over here, but this is the big, garbly gook of resources that you have. And you'll notice there's more there than what I actually had in my file. That's because there are two modes to when you're using an Azure ARM template. One is incremental and one is complete. And the other was validate, which whatever that's what that validate command does. But the incremental will say, whatever's in Azure that's not in the template, go ahead and ignore that. Whatever's in a template, you'll merge the settings, or you use a template as the settings, the new settings. So you use a template to overwrite the settings that's in Azure. In complete, it's like the ARM template is the Bible. If you've got something in Azure that's not in that ARM template, and you're using the complete mode, it'll blow it away. If you have something that's in the template and not in Azure, it'll create it. So the complete is kind of like the sketchy, on my mind, like you gotta be careful when you do that. So I think what they're doing here is just saying, okay, you want an automation script, here's your entire resource group inside that file. They'll even have deployments in there. Everything, Aaron and I were talking about this the other day, and I said, be careful, everything's a resource in Azure. It is, it literally is. Everything is a resource. So that's a good starting point, though. Obviously, they're going through I don't want to say extreme, they're going through a lot of links to make sure that, you have what you need to use their product. So, I mean, that's pretty handy to me, because we got into this stuff kind of after we created a litany of Azure resources, so it would be hard to create this from scratch. But you can also use this, which is a sort of a reference for different, basically every Azure resource in every schema version is here somewhere. So if you're using whatever, what are we doing? It looks like it's 8.1.16 for the API version, then you'll be able to find that here's 8.1.16, right? And you'll be able to go through and look at sites. That's what sites look like. Like if you want to use the Azure template to create a website, that's what it looks like in sites. So we'll that's done. Cool. Hopefully this doesn't bomb. If it bombs, I apologize. It does work. If it bombs, it's something that I did. So any questions on this? Assuming this works, and I'll leave this up here so we can look at it. I'm done. I don't have anything else to talk about necessarily. Any further questions on this stuff?
My observation of this is I've worked with AWS and Google Cloud, and they're all three very similar.
Yeah.
As far as building that pipeline, the continuous integration, and the level of capacity. So you seem to be very fluent and familiar with all the nooks and crannies. What's the learning curve?
For Azure DevOps specifically, or for Azure period?
For DevOps, would you just walk us through rather quickly?
Yeah.
To be as proficient, would it take us a year?
No, absolutely not. If you worked in it every single day and you were doing activities that allowed you to touch because we didn't even cover things like test plans or the artifacts, which is basically it's package management. If you guys, anybody have their own NuGet servers? Okay, you can use that as a service here, where you just use that, and then you can tie that into your CICD right there. It's pretty handy. So, but yeah, learning curve-wise, for that main stuff that we just went through, what, a week, 2 weeks, tops, if you're using it every day. Portal site. That's what I said about Git, man. Sit down and watch a 2-hour Portal site on Git and come away, with an open mind there. This loses its live updates sometimes. That drives me nuts. So that's the moment of truth. If this passes, we're good. So. All right. Well, like I said, I'll leave this up here so you don't have to sit around and wait. If it breaks, it breaks. I'm not going to try to fix it at this point. Trust me, this stuff works when you do it right. I broke it if it doesn't work right. So, again, you can, I'll put this slide back up real quick. You can, I forget the key. You can hit me on Twitter. I respond to that pretty frequently, or I'm into that pretty frequently, so you can do that. You can use whatever contact information is at that link. I have business cards if you guys want to reach out to me. I can answer questions on this and give you more detailed explanations on everything. I also want to take the opportunity to say we are really aggressively seeking new talent. If anybody's looking for a new opportunity, we have a lot of different styles of opportunities at a lot of different levels. My team is hiring a senior level person, an experienced level person, so like developer 2, 3, and senior, and some other groups are looking for other people in that area as well. So let me know. I can pass out cards, but thank you guys for listening, and sorry I ran a little long. All right.
Thank you, sir.